All right, I need all my angry women to assemble. This one's for you. Ladies, I need all of us to get more pissed. That's it. That's the tweet.
Oh, y'all are not gonna like this one.
Aw, who told you that getting angry at men was bad? A man? You're listening to Hot Takes by Anna. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Hot Takes by Anna. Today we are talking about, as you can see based on the title, the manufactured morality of the patriarchy, because once you examine it more deeply, you start seeing it is literally manufactured, specifically in the way that women are morally policed. And this is something that I have been really digging into a lot lately. This is another one of those fairly recent realizations that, I think I just saw a reel about it a few months ago, and it just jogged my brain and kind of that is really true. Like, women are held to a completely different standard of morality under the patriarchy, which unfortunately makes sense. Because when you look at systems of oppression, you can see that they don't just rely on rules and telling the oppressed what to do, don't do this, don't do that. It also involves a degree of basically spinning it into a moral failing if the oppressed group is not fitting into their designated role under the patriarchy, which is exactly what has happened here with in terms of how women are judged for how they live their lives. This lack of desire to fulfill the typical gender role of a woman, right? The wife, the mom, the subservient, the caretaker. Any deviation from that is really viewed as a moral failing in our society currently under patriarchy, right? Like, when you really, really think about it, I mean, just think of how women are treated who openly want to be child-free, openly do not want to get married. I mean, it's, oh, you must want to be a hoe. Oh, you're selfish. You're not a good woman. So this whole system relies on making women feel like they are bad people and that they are failing morally if they are not expressing the desire to fulfill these roles. One way specifically that I have been noticing this lately is seeing how women's emotions have been just completely weaponized by the patriarchy and completely mislabeled and ultimately really just used to keep women in their place, right? And anger, I think, is the primary emotion in which we see this happen. Now, we definitely see this weaponization of women's emotions in general across the board. Now, when you look at how women's emotions are viewed under the patriarchy, and this is one of those things that I think a lot of times people don't realize is a direct result of being under the patriarchy, right? It's just kind of, we've seen it all our lives. We've seen all these narratives about women, when they get angry, they're just overreacting. They're being hysterical. When women are, expressing their opinion or pushing back on something, it's, oh, you're nagging. Or, women getting accused of overthinking when all they're really doing is just thinking critically. So we see this all across the board. However, I think when it comes to anger specifically, that's really where we see men and just, society as a whole hone in on that as a moral failing of women. And unfortunately, it makes sense why it has to be that way, or maybe I should say in quotes, has to. As we all know, myself, as well as many other comrades, we're all out here trying to dismantle these systems, but it does unfortunately make a lot of sense when you look at why women have to be deemed as just angry and hysterical, and why this emotion of anger has to be so heavily policed in order for the patriarchy to stay in place. Because when we look at how women have been treated for thousands of years, and we've debunked this already in several other episodes, you see that, okay, actually women have a lot of really valid reasons to be angry. They have a lot of really valid reasons to want to change the system. I'm convinced that even for women who, may not label themselves as feminists, or they consider themselves to have more traditional conservative values, I I mean, I see it every day all around me. I can see it's like there's this sense of anger just brewing inside of women, even if they don't realize where that anger is coming from. I deeply believe that it's just in our bones, and even when you're being verbally told, if you are living a more traditional lifestyle as a wife and mom, and of course you're constantly being told by everyone in your community and everyone who's in that line of thinking, hey, this is normal, this is how it's supposed to be, this is your sacred duty. I really do feel that there is something inside of women's souls, inside of their bodies, that says this isn't right. And I think this is why we oftentimes see this manifest in other ways that, again, are just labeled as women being crazy. Women being this whole stereotype of women being winos and always on antidepressants, the housewives and moms. It's easy to just look at that and say, oh, yep, it's the women who are the problem. Look at them. They're being crazy. Why are they on pills? Why are they drinking so much? Rather than looking at the fact that that is a direct result of the anger that they're holding in as a result of misogyny, as a result of sexism, and just the patriarchy as a whole. So it definitely stands to reason that the patriarchy would rely on labeling women being angry as a moral failing in order for these systems to continue to be upheld. I think another way that we see women's morality being viewed quite differently and kind of judged at a different scale as men's is in the sexual arena, right? Kind of how we view women and how they choose to operate in their sex lives, right? It should not come as a surprise to anyone listening to this, but obviously women's sexuality is way, way more heavily policed than men's, right? Just in anything they do. I think this is something that I observed from a very young age. It's a very, very common sentiment that most progressive circles take note of. But when you really when you dive deeper into this and realize that it's not just, women are looked at with a slightly more critical eye when it comes to how they conduct themselves sexually, but it's the fact that women having any degree of sexual autonomy at all is considered a moral failing. I mean, just looking around and seeing that, the way society treats prostitution, as opposed to when a woman is literally sexually assaulted or raped. It's like you see more anger and more pushback and just more moral outrage over a woman deciding that she wants to be, any form of sex worker, or even just women wanting to have casual sex, right? That is viewed as this deep, deep moral failing, and it's something that truly does receive more moral outrage from men and even society as a whole than women being victims of assault. Like, I'm gonna pause there for a second to let that sink in, because that's one of those that's another one of those very recent realizations I had. And I wish I could remember the content creator, but I did see a reel on this and I was watching it and thinking, yeah, that is absolutely true. And I realized with horror that is absolutely how society views women exercising their own sexual autonomy, which obviously leads to much deeper and more sinister implications when you really, really think about it. Society and really patriarchy relies on women not realizing that they have that autonomy and not choosing to exercise it and choosing to only be sexual when it's to act as an object for men's sexual pleasure, or to act as a breeding machine and produce babies for men. I mean, those are really the only ways that it's socially acceptable for women to exercise their sexuality. So once again, unfortunately, it does make sense. It does make sense that the patriarchy would want women to behave in this way. Patriarchy relies on women behaving this way. Patriarchy relies on women really just sitting there and taking it and only fulfilling their specific narrow roles of wife, aka maid, mother, aka incubator and caretaker, and then sex doll when men need their sexual release. That's the really harsh truth. That's the reality that we're living in. So when you look at how society reacts towards women engaging in certain behaviors versus how they act towards men doing the exact same thing, you start realizing that this whole idea of morality is very conditional, which is a really, really hard thing to have to unpack. And it's been a very recent realization for me, having to look at certain aspects of society that I've always just considered to be a given and saying, oh, like, does it really have to be this way? Or is this just something that a bunch of men made up a few thousand years ago? And I think morality in general under the patriarchy is unfortunately one of those conditional things. And again, it's very, it's hard to digest that fact. It definitely has led to me personally kind of feeling a little bit destabilized, kind of feeling like I've lost my footing, because all of these things that I've been told all my life, hey, do this, and you're a good person, do this, and you're a good woman. You look at it and you're like, this entire metric I've been basing my life off of is made up. So I realize that it is very, very difficult to take in this fact. But on the other hand, it is quite liberating, right? It is quite freeing to be able to see things for how they really are and say, hey, like, this moral code is entirely made up. This moral code is not fair. This moral code is not applying to everyone the same way, and therefore I don't have to partake in it. I don't have to hold myself to this standard. I think the best advice that I have heard on this topic was from, of course, my Lord and Savior, the Slumflower, who I've spoken about quite a bit. But in one of her episodes in season 3, she talks about how women should be focused on being a good person, not being a good woman. Because you look at all of the traits that society considers to make up a good woman, right? Being subservient, being meek, not talking out of turn, not being too loud, not complaining, not being naggy, being pleasant, being a natural caretaker, being a natural nurturer. These are very gendered expectations, and what makes a good man is very different from what makes a good woman. In fact, a lot of these traits that are considered a good thing, right? They are considered being moral. They are considered, being an upstanding man. If you're a man that's doing them, you put those traits on a woman and it's like, nope, you're being a bad woman. This is not what a good woman does. Being a leader, being able to make executive decisions, even the emotion of anger that we just talked about, obviously how the patriarchy treats women who get angry. But when it's men getting angry, it's almost always justified, if not even praised, right? I think that men definitely get this righteous anger pass quite a bit more often, when it's a male world leader deciding to send bombs across the globe, and but it's justified, right? So it's just all of these traits, you flip them around, and when it's a woman doing them, somehow it's bad, which really just doesn't make sense, when you really sit down and think about it. This kind of goes back to this whole idea that I talked about in my first episode, right? About how the ideal scenario, the ideal world, at least for me, is one in which people's worth is not assigned based on their gender. And someone's gender roles are not there with the sole purpose of serving the other gender at all. And again, that goes for men as well. It's hard to even imagine a world in which men are using their assigned gender roles for good to actually help women. But in theory, the most equitable outcome for this would be for these gendered roles really to just not exist, and for people to just exist as people, and for morality to be consistent. I think this is another reason why we're seeing what I call the results of late stage patriarchy. As we know, we're in late stage capitalism, we're in late stage patriarchy, we're even in late stage feminism, as I discussed in episode 1. But where we're seeing all of these systems are crumbling, all of the cracks in these foundations that we've always held as our sole source of truth are being revealed. And it's one of those things that's actually quite obvious and actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Like, hey, this conditional moral code for people. Hey, you can do this if you're this gender, but not if you're this. I mean, that's bound to result in conflict, and especially when women get access to the internet, to education, to being allowed to talk to each other freely and just start waking up and realizing these things. So when you think about it more deeply, you do start seeing why women have been intentionally kept in the dark, because when they're allowed to see the world for what it is and when they're able to wake up, per se, they're able to very clearly see the conditionality of this moral code by which all of us are being told to adhere to, which, of course, is not a good foundation for any society. So I think it's inevitable that we've come to this. I think it makes sense that we are now seeing that this world built by men simply doesn't work. So my advice to women moving forward, because I always try, if possible, to end on a note of, okay, what can we do about this, right? Because as we discussed, it is very, very demoralizing, very disheartening to have your eyes opened to the unfairness of how women are judged morally in comparison to how men are. But what can we do about it? I think first and foremost, going back to the Slumflower's advice, be a good human, not a good woman. Focusing on being a good person just in general, treating other people how they should be treated, having qualities that, you know, that if they're objectively considered good for, why can't you take on those qualities as well? You know, what, questioning, does this really make me bad? And also questioning, who is telling you that's bad? Who is giving the messaging? Because another aspect that I think needs to be noted in all of this, and I won't get too into detail for now because I'm actually going to dive further into this in my next episode, but this idea of who's telling you it's bad, right? You know, like, who's telling you that it makes you a bad woman to do this? Men? Or women who are just regurgitating the ideas of men, right? Like, of course it's in men's best interest for you not to exercise your sexual autonomy, for you not to think that you have to be in this role of wife and mother, for you to, you know, be angry. These things are things that don't serve men. So I think if we as women can just start focusing more on being a good person, and when we're being told that we're not being a good person, questioning, who's this coming from? And then deciding how to move accordingly. So I will leave you all on that note for today. I cannot wait to catch you in the next episode, which is actually the season finale. So, yeah, please be sure to join me next week. You know, get the word out to anyone about my podcast. I always appreciate it. Anyone you'd think that would like it, and even if you think they wouldn't, always appreciate the shares and any sort of engagement that I can get as I am attempting to get off my feet and grow. So with that, thank you all for listening, and I will catch you in the next one.